thinking I was all alone. Yeah, I'm staking my claim on the day that you first said your name. Yeah, I'll gamble it all, 'cause my heart is ready for the fall. Yeah, I'll only look back to make sure that I'm still on your track. All my life I will remember the day love hit me like a freight train. When we pulled into Calgary, she stood up and said, well, this is me. If you're coming back down the line, look me up if you find the time. Now I know what my daddy said, patient men will always get ahead. But we're building too much steam, and I won't regret what could have been. So I flew out the door with a whistle and a roar. Yeah, I'm staking my claim on the day that you first said your name. Yeah, I'll gamble it all, 'cause my heart is ready for the fall. Yeah, I'll only look back to make sure that I'm still on your track. All my life I will remember the day love hit me like a freight train. Yeah, I'm staking my claim on the day that you first said your name. Yeah, I'll gamble it all, 'cause my heart is ready for the fall. Yeah, I'll only look back to make sure that I'm still on your track. All my life I will remember the day. All my life I will remember the day love hit me like a freight train. Like a freight train.
Stars of cool evening wink their gentle eyes. Little fox, look. Soft is the dress the flower is wearing. Little fox, touch. Sweet drops of heaven drench the grass in perfume. Little fox, smile. Sour tongues dry and weep for mercy. Little fox, taste. The earth is moving and the wind is stirring, but you're warm on my chest, and I can't.
Hello, alrighty, here we go. Good morning, everyone. Wow, good morning, everyone. There we go. It's Friday. You made it through your first almost full week. So this chapel is the Way Chapel. It's the chapel that myself and Michael lead. Now that doesn't mean that you'll always see us up here, but because today we have Kevin speaking. So if you haven't heard yet, then you must have been sleeping under a rock, because we are going on the freshman retreat this afternoon. So I think that's very fun. I think the returning students who are going think that's very fun. Any returning students here that have been on the freshman retreat before? We missed it last year, but is it fun? Lots of fun. Okay, so there's just lots of activities. People bring their guitars, they're singing, so it's a lot of fun. So this morning, Kevin is going to share about a psychological response to COVID. For some of you, COVID started when you were in grade 11, and so it's just been a long experience, and so he's going to share about how we respond well to that. And our worship team is going to lead us in one song, so I ask you to stand. I'm going to pray, and then we'll get going. So Father, thanks for today. Thanks for the students who you've brought us this year. We are grateful, God, that we get to do this in person this year. Lord, as we talk about how to respond well to COVID and see how those things apply to us, God, I ask that we would recognize when your Spirit is speaking to us. Lord, as these students do the different things that they're doing this weekend, those who are staying here and those who are going on the retreat, Lord, I pray that we would recognize your presence with us in each step. God, be with the worship team as they lead us, and be with Kevin as he shares this morning. In your name I pray. Amen.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns His face away as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon His shoulder. keep standing.
All right, we can do better than that. Good morning. There we go. Get a little bit of adrenaline going, heighten the action a little bit for ourselves, get things flowing this morning. So what I want you to do, I want you to talk about the last 18 months, but in this way. I want you to talk about it in what are the changes that you've been through? What are the changes in the last 18 months? Now, I know your memory has got to be better than mine. I'm aging and senility is creeping. But 18 months, it's sort of maybe reverse thinking, okay? So what were the changes that are most recent? And let's go back all the way back to like February, March of 2020, all right? So I want you to talk with 4 people, 3 or 4 people around you, okay? Just turn around. What changes? You got a minute. Go. What changes have you experienced? All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, stop. Wait, keep standing. What's everybody sitting for? Come on. Got to stand. Got to get the blood flowing a little bit, okay? That helps you in your retention of this material because I want you to remember every little thing that happens here, okay? So, I want you to do something just a little awkward maybe, but most of you are awkward anyway, so... I want you to yell out what some of these changes are, okay? Just feel free. So what changes did you go through? You got married. Woo. All right. Okay, that's a mind blower. Okay, here we go. You moved to Canada. Yeah, that's really a strange decision. Okay, all right. What else? What over here? What happened? That's not strange, that's just weird. Okay, what do we got over here?
I improve on my English.
You improve on your English. Boy, that's great, yeah. You know, what you don't know is that everybody else in this room needs to improve on their English too. So that's good. Way to go, good. What else? What other changes did you go through? You moved back to your parents' house. Oh. You had a sponge off of them for a while, right? Way to go. Okay, yeah. I had to do that too that was ages ago, but anyway, okay. Yeah. What else? 4 jobs. Wow. I can make some comments about getting fired and all that kind of stuff, but I don't, 4 jobs. I bet you a lot of you had those kinds of transitions. Back and forth from school to jobs, maybe to job as things got opened and closed and all those kind of things. So, have a seat. So, you've gone through a lot of changes. And I want to talk a little bit today from the psychological perspective about those kind of changes. And I want to create a self-awareness for you, hopefully, that we can talk about. We can talk about the experience of stress and a little bit of the regulation and the regulation and response to that. And depending on time, maybe a few questions at the end. So I'm a psychologist, and I've done a fair bit of study in this area. I tend to lean toward the educational social psychology side of things, but we going to learn together. So as I'm thinking about what's happened over the course of this last little while, I think that with all the changes that we've gone through, I think there are things about ourselves that tend to be hidden. Things that we've just endured life. We've had to find a way to cope. And so we found a way to cope, but it's been unusual for us to do that in the way that we normally would pre-COVID. The experience of stress, and so what I'm going to do here is just present a whole whack of different ways that people look at things, perspectives on stress, how we look at it, and hopefully somewhere out of there we'll get something that is helpful in terms of your self-awareness. And then we'll walk toward the end with a little bit of what are the helps that can come from that. So, the experience of stress. You have, in any event, you have a stressor, you have stress, and you have a stress response. The stressor is simply the activating event, all right? It cuts something from the external environment, physical, emotional, whatever it is, and it tends to be, and when I use the word threatening, I'm not using the word in the sense of, a terrorist is attacking me and I've got to keep my, looking over my shoulder all the time. But it's entering into, it's a new entry into your present state of what is called homeostasis, all right? Present state of stability. So there's a stressor, an outside event. Then you have stress, which is the response to that stressor. And this involves your system, your bodily system. So your hormonal, nervous, psychological system, and how it involves your personality, involves your history, and your history involves your memory, and how you've learned to respond to different situations in the past. And so what defines stress for us is different for everybody. It's unique for everybody in that sense. And the third part is the stress response. And this is the biochemical, physiological, behavioral, psychological responses that come from that and threaten our homeostasis. They destabilize us for that. Stress itself never lies in the stressor. Stress itself lies on this other half. Let's see if I can get this red thing going here. On this half, or this two-thirds of the equation. How we respond to that particular stressor. So I want you to take just, not long, you don't have to write anything down, but I want you to take a minute, quietly think about those changes that you've been through in the last 18 months. And I want you to reflect on your physical, your emotional, your mental, and your spiritual health during that time. Okay? And what struggles or stresses have you noticed about that? So just be quiet for a minute. What's it been for you? For some of you, these last months have been, I mean, you don't have a long life history. I could be your grandpa, okay? So, I mean, that's how aged I am. But you don't have a long life history to reflect back on. But for the short 18 to 20 years that you have to reflect, these last year and a half has been like on any other. Tomorrow, we look back 20 years to what was called, or what is called, 9/11. Changed the world. This is another one of those it changed the world moments. And you'll reflect on it with your kids and so forth, and look back and say, what happened to me back then? How did I work through, how did I deal with the situations that I was confronted with over the course of these last 18 months? For most of us, it's not been easy. And it's not been easy because, I'm going to jump a couple of slides and then go back. It's not been easy because we've had to deal with uncertainty. Oops, I'm doing it here and then I'm doing it here. Come on, Kevin, get your head together here. Okay. Because there's three things that are always present when stress is heightened: uncertainty, lack of information, and that sense of control, that loss of control that you might have. I'm not going to ask, but I bet you it's very close to 100% that you've experienced all three of those things in the last 18 months. Because what you expected over here or up here on any one kind of event or normal track of life, it did not pan out. It's had to change. And so there's uncertainty. There's lack of information. And there's a sense of loss of your own personal control. Let's go back one. Just want to present some definitions here. So when we're talking about stress and stressors, talk about basic definitions. So stress is a state of disharmony or threatened homeostasis. We use that word, homeostasis, comes from the Greek word, the front prefix comes from the Greek word to be the same. Okay, so we're talking about stability, a state of stability. But basically, a working definition of stress would be the balance between what you have to do and the resources you have to do it with. A stressor, a threat, real, perceived, that tends to disturb that homeostasis. Acute stress doesn't mean it's pretty. It means that it's an immediate, short-term response to that threat of destabilization. Chronic stress is that activation of stress over a long period of time. And when either you find it difficult to escape because either you don't recognize it or because you have no control over it. Either of those can happen. There's two larger categories of stress. There's eustress, which is good stress. So athletes, for instance, when you go into a performance situation, you want a little bit of stress, all right? So when you go to speak in front of a class, you want some butterflies. You want a little bit of stress, all right? That tends to elevate the performance. We'll look at that down the road here. But there's also distress, all right, which is negative stress. Like if you didn't have any stress, you'd be dead, okay? So you do need some stress. You do need some stress in your life. But most of us have learned to cope with whatever degree of stress we have in our lives in ways that are healthy, excepting for situations that are unusual or extreme, that cause uncertainty, don't have enough information to it, so we can't adapt to it, and we can't control it then. Let's go past. So, I want to bring this into here because, and talk about this. For you freshmen, you'll hear this in another week when we talk about learning. But this is my formula for learning. I've sort of pasted it together, adapted some material from other people. But everything that you do has, every thought that you think, every behavior you commit or carry out has an accompanying emotion. We know that from fMRI scans in the brain. So when people think things, there's other paths in the brain that are lit up that work, that go to the limbic system, which has to do with, which carries a lot of the emotional response kind of stuff. So every thought you have, every action you have, has an accompanying emotion. And this is how we learn. This is how we learn. Learning is a multi-sensory experience. And this is what I tell my students in my class. I say, if you want to learn something good, make sure a good number of your senses are involved in it. So you're hearing it, you're seeing it, you're speaking it, you're writing it. PTSD is really good, bad learning. It's a learned response that's learned really good because of the level of emotion is so high attached to something like trauma. The level of emotion is so high that the brain says, "Oh, I don't know how to handle it." The emotion plus the experience plus how much attention is paid to that. So in trauma, there's lots of attention paid to that, equals attraction. This is a formula for any kind of learning, whether you're learning from a textbook, from a lecture, from life's experience. This is what happens. Attraction then is the foundation of habits. So if you have, over the course of these last 18 months particularly, responded in certain ways of distress to situations, you have actually learned how to continue to respond. That becomes the default for the future. Because your brain changes every time. Your brain changes all the time. It's called neuroplasticity. There's a whole sense of adaptive changes that happen to you, not just in traumatic moments, but even now. Your brain is changing. Isn't that marvelous? It's amazing. And so we need to be careful on how we respond in these kinds of learning scenarios. So here I'm going to start, or I'm going to continue to roll on some concepts. They don't all necessarily fit together, but what I said initially was that these are perspectives. You know, it's somebody's looking at it from here, and then another person looks at it from here, and another person understands it from here. And hopefully something in there sort of resonates with you and gives you an idea. So when we talk about emotions, a fellow by the name of Ross Buck, a psychologist at the University of Connecticut, talked about on the therapeutic side of things, so where people get helped in dealing with emotions. He talked about emotions as sort of having 3 different areas that they work on. And he called emotion 3, or the category emotion 3, he says is accessible to self. So the way this chart works here is it goes across, okay, from left to right, emotion 2, left to right, emotion 1, left to right. So he says this is the subjective experience of emotions that you feel and that you're aware of, you're conscious of. All right? So if you start thinking now about how you are emoting right now, all right, then you become conscious of it. And this is where, we call it emotional intelligence, where we become self-aware of how we are dealing with our emotional self at that point in time. So there's that level of social, of biofeedback that's there. The second one, level, is the level of emotion that's accessible to others. So there's a whole nother level of emotion that you may be aware of, but often aren't aware of, how you're coming across to other people and how other people interpret your emotional state. Facial expressions, nonverbals, those kinds of things are passed on at touches, pauses, and it's quite, as I mentioned, it's quite oftentimes oblivious to us of how we're coming across, unless we think of it while we're conversing or engaging with that situation. And this is the thing that allows us to socially coordinate. All right, to engage with one another, and it affects other people. And then there's what he called emotion 1, which isn't accessible to us. We don't know what's going on. Our autonomic system, endocrinal system, our immune system, are the things that are responding to any one kind of stressor that may be out there. And we don't know. But this is this adaptation mode that's there. So when we think about that, a fellow by the name of Peter Levine led a team talking about an integrated system of response. And so nurses, I think you'd recognize some of this stuff here. But so you have the autonomic nervous system that's dealing with these two things. So those two big pink blobs on the chart there talk about the basics of what's happening to your body when a stressor approaches. Part of your nervous system, two parts of your nervous system that work well for you are what they call the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the reason they call it a sympathetic nervous system is because it literally sympathizes or comes alongside a stressor that you're feeling, and it tells your body how to respond. And so, I just enacted your sympathetic nervous system, Elliot. All right? Even though he didn't do much more than blink his eye, I still affected his sympathetic nervous system. Now what his body has to do is figuring out, is this guy still a threat or is he not? And if he says he's still a threat, then what happens to him is this kind of stuff on the left-hand side. He has a secretion of stress hormones. I can just see it. It's happening. Your face is getting red. All right. Central nervous system is starting to get into. You have this sensory alertness that's just up there. You increase your muscle tension. There's a bunch of other bodily functions that actually, including digestion, that actually cease in order for you to be alert to the situation that's there. But there's a whole nother side of it. If Elliot sees that and he says, this guy's just a wuss, nothing he could do to me, then what does his body do? This parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and it says, okay, that feels better, all right? And it seeks to restore and replenish that balance in your body. So what we're looking at here is this integrated response of the whole nervous system. One of the longest words in the English language is a convoluted psychological word that talks about this integrated response. Psychoneuroimmunoendocrine response. There's 26 letters in that word. But that goes to tell you that it's not just your hormones that are kicking in. It's not just the neurons firing away. Your whole body is responding to a stressor. If it's acute, for a short time, immediate, the balance is restored quickly. If it's not, then other stressors come into play, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Another way to look at this whole scenario is from a regulation side of things. So there's a team of individuals led by a fellow by the name of Peter Gilbert. His name's on the bottom of this thing. He led a team on the therapy side of it, talking about how do we help people who are dealing with stresses. And he sort of said that there's sort of three major areas that we look at. There's this system in the body, and there's no physiological explanation, or there are physiological connections, but it's more from a therapeutic kind of a thing. That there's an incentive resource-seeking kind of a system. And what this part of us does, it seeks to make sure that we have enough available to sustain us. So nutrition, safety, those basic kinds of things that are part of just keeping everyday life going. So there's that system there. And so when we start thinking about that system, the feelings that accompany that, I don't know if you can see them from up here. No, you can't. I guess, whatever, it's small. But the feelings, this is the blue circle up there. You're wanting, you're pursuing, you're achieving, you're consuming, those kinds of things. So that there's that incentive reward kind of a thing that keeps you sustained. Then there's the soothing, caring, the green and contentment system, where we need the function of feeling safe. And we need to be content with the way that things are. So we're not pushing ourselves all the time. We feel connected, we feel cared for, we feel trusted as part of that. Thirdly, there's that orange circle there. There's the threat and self-protection system. And it's there to pick up on these threats, on these stressors that come our way. We do this every day in ways that we are oblivious to. So I'm walking down the hall. Elliot, I'm picking on you, okay? You deserve it, by the way. Okay? So I'm walking down the hall, and Elliot shouts out my name. Okay, well, I usually won't startle that way, but, I'll turn around and startle. And I can do one of two things with him. I can, go to Elliot and say, "Hi, what do you want?" Or I can say, "It's just Elliot," and move along, that kind of a thing. So, but even the little things, even if Elliot didn't say anything, but as I was walking by, I caught him out of the corner of my eye. Oh, he's there. My body, and I don't do anything with it, my body has just dealt with a perceived threat. Okay? So our systems are that sensitive to changes around us, most of which happen in our day are inconsequential. All right? But that's how sensitive this beautiful body that we've been created with, actually functions. Amazing. Amazing. Let's move on. So when we talk about dealing with our emotions as a big part of the stress experience, There's 4 things here that emotional competence requires. I'm not talking about emotional intelligence. That's a little different kind of a thing. But this is the idea of I'm able to manage my emotions. All right? Competence in emotions. So 1, the capacity to feel our emotions for awareness. For the idea that I'm self-aware of the emotions that are either happening to me now or just happened to me now. I've taken enough time to think about that. I'm aware of it. Sometimes when I have expressed emotions wrongly, or maybe a heightened emotion that was wrongly expressed at another time, I realize a few minutes later, oh man, I need to go back and apologize to somebody I just said that to. Because it was just like, I don't know, they probably took it wrong, you know. I didn't mean to hurt them, but, you know. So, you know, that self-awareness oftentimes isn't right immediate, but usually if we're aware of it, it comes soon after. Secondly, the ability to express our emotions effectively and appropriately. So, what happens when we get into an acute situation of stress, chronic situation of stress, sorry. When we get into a chronic situation of stress, what happens is that we tend to become less aware, and you'll see that in a few minutes, some of the charts I'll show you here. You'll see that you become less aware of your emotional state. And when you become less aware of your emotional state, then what happens is you don't tend to respond appropriately. And this is what healthcare providers, psychologists, and so forth tend to pick out in conversations, all right? They see that, they're aware of that. Nurses, you better learn this. They see that and they're aware of that, and they respond appropriately to that scenario that they're engaging. 3, the facility to distinguish between present, pertinent psychological reactions as opposed to those from the past. So the question is here, is if I have learned, and my body and my brain, rather, has learned to respond to certain psychological or certain stressors in certain ways, and that's sort of my default expression, I can also learn to respond differently. I can change the default, all right? So my past doesn't have to be my present. 4thly, the awareness of those genuine needs that do require satisfaction. So there are needs that require satisfaction. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of some of the social issues, social engagement rather, that we've missed out on. I mean, I didn't have Thanksgiving last year with my family. I didn't have Christmas with my family except for Zooming. Like, that really works. And I miss that. I miss that engagement. So, a couple of years ago, a gal by the name of Ruby Joe Walker, along with the team, talked about our reactions to different things and what that looks like. There's a lot of green coming up from these boxes, and on the bottom, that looks nice. Okay, so the green is sort of the safety level, okay? So we got green, yellow, the caution level, red level. Whoa, we got to stop, make things happen here. So what we're looking at. So when this talks about, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the categories of the parasympathetic nervous system. What's happening then? Sympathetic nervous system on the yellow, going up on the right-hand side. Sympathetic nervous system, and then the parasympathetic nervous system kicking in, and what it increases and decreases. So when we are engaged socially, we have those things that are listed there. Calmness and connection, we're settled, we're grounded. We've got this curiosity that's open to other ideas and other things. we're compassionate, we're mindful, we're in the present, okay? So that's the level of social engagement. And then there's safety there, and there's also, I won't go into the polyvagal physiological side of it too much. That's on the right-hand side. But when that happens, there's really good things that happen out of that. So if you see on the right-hand side, it increases things bodily like digestion, intestinal motility, so you don't have gas, resistance to infection, immune response, rest and recuperation, health and vitality. You get circulation to non-vital organs, such as skin and extremities, oxytocin, so you get modulators, hormonal modulators in there that work to help you just function through the day, those kinds of things. And, that all helps you to engage appropriately. And it decreases your defensive responses. So if you go up to the next stage, you start getting into what psychologists call, a stress response, or a response to a threat, is, you fight, you freeze, or you flee, okay? That kind of a thing. So when we're talking here, though, we're talking about fight or flight. And this is where the body, if you look on the right-hand side there, blood pressure elevates, heart rate elevates, fuel availability elevates. Your body pushes attentional resources to that. Adrenaline starts to flow. You start to oxygenate better. Pupil size, dilation of your bronchi, so that you're breathing, taking in more breath. But it also decreases fuel storage. So you don't have as much in reserve. It decreases digestion, salivation, relational ability, and it decreases immune response. So this is, if you look under the word sympathetic there, it becomes, this is the cautionary area, and you get what is called often hyperarousal. All right? So it's a heightened point of arousal. Let's go up to the red zone. In the red zone here, we have, if you look under the dorsal vagal, you'll look under the life thread, it says there, hypoarousal. So what do you have there? If you look at that curve, on the left-hand side of that curve, it starts out with things like helplessness, raised pain threshold, depression, numbness, dissociation. On the back side of that, you have things like shame and shutdown, hopelessness, even preparation for death. You feel trapped. And the same things that increased and decreased are just heightened again on that side. So when we start thinking about this idea of where are we at, this is another way to think about, am I socially engaged? Oftentimes our bodies are trying to tell us something when we're sick, or when we're not feeling well, or when some bodily function isn't doing well. They're trying to tell us something about that connection between our engagement socially and what's happening there. It's all together. It's all together. I'm not going to stay long on this one, but again, you'll notice hypoarousal versus hyperarousal, and there's this just window of tolerance where we're healthy, where we can tolerate things. And for some, that balance is less than others. But we sort of want to stay at the top of the curve and realize where we are in this. Now, this particular York's-John stress versus performance is used in business. It's talked about people who are need to perform in business, people who need to Sports world, particular athletes, talk about this whole kind of thing because you want to peak performance. So what does that involve? And you look at that. So you want to be, at certain times, you want to be obviously able to handle and perform well, but you realize you necessarily can't stay at that level all the time unless you treat yourself well and you handle particularly your emotions and your body, your physiology well. So it's a finer line, isn't it, that we walk when we look at the apex of this bell curve and we talk about the difference between focused and fatigued. That can be a fine line. When you come to term finals and the stress of finishing some assignments, coming up to that, and you got tests and all that happened there, and then you go home or you have a couple of days rest. What do you feel on the other side of that? Generally fatigued. So what you need to do then, as you recognize that, you need to say, okay, what do I need to do to restore that ability to perform? And you deal with it in that way. We can get fatigue, not just from the mental and physical things that we do, but we can also get it from things like compassion fatigue. And when I did this seminar, I went through this a little further with faculty here in May. But compassion fatigue is a preoccupation with absorbing trauma and emotional stresses of others. Do you know why counselors, if they're wise, only counsel 5 to 6 people a day? The emotional stresses of hearing people's struggles and trying to sympathize with that and trying to emote with that and come alongside that is really difficult. It's difficult. I mean, you think of what's happening in our health care system right now, the stresses and pressures that are on that. And I don't mean to scare you nurses, guys. I think you know what the situation's like. But, you know, in the ERs, in the ICUs, the pressure's really high. Really high. And, you know, as believers, and in fact, as most people, want to come alongside people and they want to help. They're compassionate. But it takes a lot of energy to maintain that level of compassion. And so how do you keep yourself aware of that and deal with that? There's also secondary trauma stress that comes along. The emotional and psychological effects experienced through indirect exposure to the details of the traumatic experiences of others. And so this is one where, you know, like paramedics have to deal with a lot. The secondary trauma stress that comes alongside of that. So there's different things in different ways that we look at in dealing with that. I wish that dealing with stress would be this easy. But our response to stress doesn't wholly occur simply within me as an individual. I want to suggest to you that social support helps to ameliorate or lessen the stress that we have. Let's get on that one there. There's two things here I picked this slide out of a set of slides that I have for a developmental psych class. But there's two words that show up here that I want to just mention here. We need attachment and we need attunement. All right? Attachment and attunement. So attachment, you've probably heard about it, and in children we think of an appropriate response, reciprocal response between, between a parent and a child. We talk about it there, but do you realize that attachment studies go right through the whole of a person's life. And once you get through childhood, attachment actually doesn't decrease. You need attachment just as much as an adult or a young adult as you did as a child. It comes in different forms. Like your mom doesn't pick you up and Google you. Huh? Wow, amazing mama, she could do that. But attachment comes in different forms. We will understand ourselves as we feel understood. We will love ourselves as we perceive that we're being loved at the deepest levels. We will care for ourselves with as much compassion as we have known the compassion of others for us. So this attunement, it's a process in which a person is tuned in to the emotional needs of others, and other people are tuned in to the emotional needs of you. It's reciprocal. Strong attachment can occur without attunement, because we may feel loved on one level, but on a deeper level, it may not be there. We may feel appreciated on one level, but on another level, it may not be there. We can end up feeling alone with our emotions, that no one can share how they feel, and we feel that no one can understand. The greatest influences on human development, health, and behavior are those of a nurturing environment. That's not just for kids. That includes my mom, who's 95 years old. Gal by the name of Jolene Park talked about, so how do we address these hidden costs that show up in our lives? And just briefly here. So we need to notice nature. One of the things is, go for a walk. Look around you. Appreciate the small things that are there in nature that you see around you. Don't stay in your room in front of a monitor getting calcified thumbs. Notice the little things. My wife, we've got a backyard that's, I think, pretty nice. My wife is into bird feeding, so it's costing us like another child to feed these birds. But anyway, you'd be surprised how many birds show up. We think, they're just a bunch of sparrows. Well, they're not. There's actually 4 or 5 different kinds of birds in that group. This year, through the course of winter and summer, she's picked up 45 different species of birds that have shown up in our backyard, including a hawk. So notice some nature. Observe your breath. Breathing, oxygenation is huge. When we get stressed, sometimes, how shallow we breathe. Somebody's out of breath, I've just won half a lap of the gym floor. I'm sucking air already, or I've climbed one level of stairs and I'm sucking air. So when we get anxious, one of the things you can do is just simply this. Sit down. And, I'll take my own word for it. Here, sit down and just relax your body and breathe through your nose, hold and exhale for 5 seconds each time, okay? So 5 seconds, breathe through your nose. Do it right now, okay? Just sort of shake your shoulder. Okay? Breathe through your nose. 1, 2, 3. Hold it for 5. Okay, you're oxygenating. All right? And it decreases levels of stress. So notice your breathing. Okay? Unite with others. Okay, we've already talked about that. Make sure you don't isolate. Replenish with good food. Your body needs those good resources. So a plate of chips every meal, breakfast. Yeah, probably not. Initiate movement. So get out there, and if the basics is walking, walk. If you're into a little more intensity, do whatever that means. And then sit in stillness. So have a time to reflect. Have a time to meditate. I won't talk about meditation here, but meditation is a big, enjoyable part, actually, of a believer's life. And then find a way to be creative. Find a way to be creative outside of the normal part of you. I bought some equipment. I want to get into digital music, production of music, have a little fun with that. 3-4 years ago, I took up the saxophone. Never played a saxophone. Always wanted to play a saxophone. And my wife is getting more accustomed to my tones. Actually, I do pretty good, I think. So, but that's another way to harness my creativity and deal with it. Lastly, the Apostle Paul says this. Every line has something in it for you. Rejoice in the Lord always. Let's read it together, okay? Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will put a guard around your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. Isn't that amazing? Finally, brothers and sisters, keep reading. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Be warmed, be filled, and be gone. Thank you. Just want to say, just as an addendum here, if you are struggling, and some of you could be struggling right now with some of the changes, and you find that you're a little bit anxious, and you can't think of a way to deal with it, there are people around here who can help you, okay? All right? Maybe it's your roommate. Maybe it's the connections you're making through Impact Group. Maybe it's an instructor, professor, maybe it's your DSD, whoever, okay? So be open to that. God bless.